watching all of those kids just being kids and having lots of fun. Us kids today are very lucky because we are growing up with laws and rights allowing us to go to school each and every day to get the education we deserve. This, however, was not always true for many children growing up before and during the Industrial Revolution. When the Industrial Revolution started in the United States, there was a high demand for labor, so families quickly moved from rural farm areas to the newly industrialized city to find work. Moving to the industrial cities was a bad move for most families as they could barely survive and they had to have every able member of their families go to work. This led to a high rise in child labor in factories and mines. Children as young as 6 years old and sometimes younger often worked very long hours in dangerous factory conditions for very little money. This left no time for school or play. These children sometimes worked up to 19 hours a day with a 1 hour or less break. Children were useful as laborers because their size allowed them to move in small spaces in factories or mines where adults could not fit. Children were also easier to manage, and most importantly, they could be paid less than adults. Factory owners took advantage of orphans and hardly ever paid them because they felt giving them food, shelter, and clothing was equal to their pay. The conditions were horrible, and the children operated large and dangerous equipment. Every workplace had their own dangers. In the mines, boys sometimes fell to their deaths or developed lung diseases. In the factories and the mills, children became overheated or were injured on the job. Every day, children risked their lives. Injuries and death would occur because the children were not getting enough sleep and were not properly trained on the equipment, or the equipment was too big for them to handle. Not only did the children have to fear the working conditions, they also were afraid of being punished and beaten for being late or making minor mistakes. Both boys and girls who worked in factories were subject to beatings and other forms of abuse. The children's safety was never taken into consideration. Child labor was becoming increasingly more significant due to the economy. In the early 1900s, a social movement was established to protest against child labor. Facing opposition by employers, many felt that social reformers were unable to see how child labor was the driving force of the United States economy. Employers who were in favor of child labor felt it built work ethics in the children. These social reformers focused on the well-being of the children and the abolishment of child labor. In 1904, the first organized group was formed. They were known as the National Child Labor Committee. This committee consisted of politicians, social workers, teachers, and citizens who were all against child labor. This committee campaigned for tougher state and federal laws against the abuses of child labor. Two of the most known reformers were Jane Addams and Lewis Hine. Jane Addams was a social worker who dedicated her life to helping American children and abolishing child labor. Lewis Hine was the committee's greatest publicist. He was a teacher who left his profession to work full-time as an investigator for the committee. For several years, Hine traveled and took pictures of the exploitation of children in the workforce. He liked how the pictures expressed so much more than what anybody could say in words. Hine found that many of the children were receiving an insignificant amount of education. If children attended school, they would lose their jobs. Children at the time did not want to face the punishments they would receive from their families, so they went to work. Later, these pictures were published and seen by many. The impact the pictures had on America was unspeakable. The pictures told a story that demonstrated violations against children in the most revolting way. During his investigations, he would speak with owners and bosses of these factories and mills. During these investigations, he would notice several underage workers in the factories. Due in part to the backlash of Heinz Pictures, in 1909, some of the states started to pass laws restricting the age at which children could work. It wasn't until 1916 that Congress finally passed its first child labor bill. It was called the Keating-Owen Act. This act banned the sale of any article produced by children, and it limited the number of hours a child could work. 2 years later, the Supreme Court said that the Keating-Owen Act was unconstitutional and abolished the act. For the next 22 years, many different child labor bills came through Congress, and as usual, the Supreme Court overturned them. During this time, one could see a significant decline in the number of children working. The decline was mostly due to the Depression. In 1938, Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act. The act set a work week of 40 hours with a minimum wage of 40 cents per hour. It prohibited child labor under the age of 16, allowing minors 16 and over to work in non-hazardous occupations. The act also set 18 as the minimum age for work in industries classified as hazardous. No minimum wage was set for non-hazardous agricultural employment after school hours and during vacations. Children aged 14 and 15 could be employed in non-manufacturing, non-mining, and non-hazardous occupations outside of school hours and during vacations for limited hours. Passing the Fair Labor Standards Act was a huge turning point in our nation's history by setting guidelines and giving children the right to a childhood and an education.